generating stations, the transfer stations, dark. And when we did that, the sewage treatment plants in Baghdad, a city of at that time about 2.5 million people, became inoperative. And so the sewage was just flowing into the Tigris River. And from the Tigris River came the water supply passing through the water purification system, which were also inoperative. And if you remember, Iraq was under a total embargo, so they could not import chlorine, which is the major chemical used in the treatment of both sewage and drinking water. So the people of Baghdad are drinking seriously contaminated water. Now, many of you may know that a bad case of diarrhea can kill a child, dehydration. But these children were ingesting serious gastrointestinal diseases that were killing them. So Leslie Stahl went to Iraq with her camera crew. She spoke to Iraqi doctors, British doctors, American doctors, UN doctors. She talked to engineers and all these people. And then she comes back to New York, where she interviews the American ambassador to the United Nations. You can Google this. It will be the coldest thing you have ever seen in your life. Leslie Stahl, a competent, experienced anchor person, is stumbling and fumbling. And she says, we have heard that 500,000 children have died. Get that number? 500,000 children have died. She says, well, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. Yes, by a factor of about 14. And she said, and you know, is the price worth it? And you switch to Madeleine Albright. Please understand this is not an effort on my part in any way to demean or denigrate Dr. Albright, who had a very difficult job explaining and defending American policy. Without a flicker of emotion on her face, Madeleine Albright says, and I quote, I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that program was aired once in this country, thousands of times overseas, especially where? In the Middle East. 500,000 dead kids are worth it, Madeleine? In her book, she says she's sorry she said that. But look, she accepted the number, and she accepted responsibility on behalf of our country. And if you think that people don't like us because we have freedom, then you've never seen that video. That is cold, heartless. And they remember, we don't. And this isn't the only illustration. I picked that one because it's particularly compelling, especially since it involves children in massive numbers, and also because it's iconic. People have seen that over and over and over. It's like the trade towers coming down. It's like that poor girl in Vietnam running up the road with her clothes blasted off. It's like the pictures out of Abu Ghraib. It's an iconic experience to see that. Take a look at it. Tell your friends about it. So when we look at the world today and the fact that the United States is engaged in bringing peace, justice, freedom, liberty, and McDonald's to Iraq and Afghanistan and maybe Pakistan and perhaps Libya and a bunch of other places like that, it's worthwhile pausing to consider what it is we are trying to do. I suggest to you that the problem we face is that for whatever reason, democracy has become our exportable religion. And we are prepared, if necessary, to convert by the sword. You will be democratic. Yeah, don't shoot. Ladies, gentlemen, by definition, you cannot impose democracy. And impose democracy is a dictatorship. You can't force people to make a free choice. That's not a free choice anymore. And what's so wonderful about democracy? It works for us, in a way. I have to, sorry, my mind is at work. My wife and I wound up in a city called Petropavlovsk, which is on the Kamchatka Peninsula on the east coast of Russia, sticking down like a Florida towards the islands of Japan. It's on the Pacific east coast of Russia. There's not much there, but my wife and I took this little excursion bus, and the driver said to us, "And now, ladies, gentlemen, I'm taking you to a place you will never forget. From top this hill, you can see houses settled paved." That made the whole visit worthwhile. But you can't compel somebody to be democratic. But look what America did in Gaza in 2006. I was there as an international election observer for the United Nations. And everybody said the election in Gaza was free and fair. And people said, "Hey, America, that's what you want in a democratic election." I said, "Yeah, but they chose the wrong people. They didn't choose the ones that we want." I said, "Well, hey, but that's what democracy's all about." No. They can have an election, but by God, they better pick the ones we want. Otherwise, we're going to declare them a terrorist organization, which we did. But one of the elements, I don't know whether they teach this in your university here, but they should. One of the key ingredients that you must have for a functioning democracy is that the organizations involved in the process are prepared to accept the possibility that they might lose. Gotta wait 2 years or whatever it is. I mean, that's a terrible thing. You might lose in an election. But America said you had a free and fair election, but by golly, you didn't pick the right people. Now, Tony Blair, if you know who he is, the former British Prime Minister, who is the mediator, I saw in a paper today, I think, has said that now that Hamas and Fatah have reconciled, the first thing we must do is recognize Israel. Really? Yes, they must recognize Israel. Oh, I'm a former diplomat. Yeah, what about it? Well, recognition is always reciprocal. I recognize your country, and you recognize my country. Has anybody suggested that Israel recognize Palestine? No one has ever even mentioned it. And if you bring it up, Mr. Netanyahu will respond with a gesture learned from his Sicilian grandmother. You see, think about this. Recognition. When you recognize a state, it has to have a capital and borders internationally recognized. Israel has neither. They say our capital is Jerusalem. Everybody else says, no, it's Tel Aviv. And where are the borders of Israel? You can't recognize a thing. It's got to be a nation. Third, groups of people do not recognize nations. Nations recognize nations. That's what it's all about. So the whole thing is a sham, a farce. And to keep saying, yes, you must recognize their right to exist. Well, hold it. What about us? The Palestinians should say. Because that's what it's all about. It's a two-way street, always and only. Except in that case, you see, hey, there goes morality out the window. If it ever came in. And then you look at the flotilla, which I took part in. I was on a little Greek ship. Two ships went from Athens. One was a cargo ship and one was a passenger ship with 48 people from 12 countries on board. And we were attacked on the high seas. If that had happened off the coast of Somalia, it would be called terrorism. Because international waters, Greek flag ships, and they came in. Nobody was killed on our ship. We had some injuries from what they call passive resistance, where you lock arms and try to keep them out of the control room. And when we got to Ashdod, which is the port for Tel Aviv, we marched off the ship, and they said, okay, we're going to expel you because you have entered the country illegally. I said, really? But I put my arms down now. I didn't want to come here. Of course they come here. How can you come? They said, so I was deported. peace and reconciliation and bringing groups together and trying to explain things. And now I can't go back for 10 years, which is unfortunate in a way. Because the Israelis said to me, don't you realize what that blockade is for? I said, you're going to tell me. Yes. That blockade at sea is to keep weapons from coming in from outside into Gaza. I said, oh, okay. Well, then what's the purpose of the blockade on the landward side? To keep weapons from coming in from Israel? Mr. Netanyahu explained it. He said, we're going to put the people of Gaza on a diet. School books? Pencils? Cumin? Fuel? Now, I want to digress for just a moment. You were kind enough to mention that I was the Deputy Director of the White House Cabinet Task Force on Terrorism in 1985. Think where you were in 1985. No, don't. History has passed you by. 1985, the older folks will remember that in Europe there was the Baader-Meinhof Dam and the Red Army Brigade, and the Achille Laura was hijacked, and in Latin America you had the FARC and the Sendero Luminoso. You had all these terrorism things going on. So they established this Cabinet Task Force on Terrorism. I was the Deputy Director of the working group. And we had the Secretaries of State and Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Stiffs of Chief and the CIA Director and all of that. And first assignment, give us a definition of international terrorism. Yes, sir. The chairman of that task force was the Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush, and now I got to know and respect. So we drafted up a definition of international terrorism, we sent it forward, and they threw it back, and they said, this looks like something we've done. So we tried again, and we did 5 versions, all of them rejected. After we disbanded, Congress said, the hell with those people, we'll write one. Google Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 2321, and you will find the U.S. legal definition of international terrorism. It's not very long. It's quite short. Let me tell you what it says. And this is verbatim, not ad-libbing a bit, but it says, international terrorism, acts threatening or harmful to human life if committed in the United States or any other state, when these acts appear to be intended to A, coerce or intimidate a civilian population. Can you think of anybody doing that? B, affect the policies of the government through intimidation or coercion. Or C, involve acts of assassination or kidnapping. Now, could you think of any countries doing this sort of thing? Well, I would hope you can, as a matter of fact, because we're doing it. We've done it all over the place. But we're the good guys, so it doesn't count. They're the bad guys, and so we're going to go get them. And the rest of the world says, what are you smoking over there? You actually expect that we're going to accept this blather of yours? I mean, you're just, you're very openly, making a fool of yourself because those things apply to us as much as, or more than, they do to other people. We have a longer reach. But let me go along now to give you some things to think about in your discussions with people that you think are thinking. I've already mentioned the Judeo-Christian tradition fallacy, but everybody, and that includes all the Arabs, always talks about the peace process. We must advance the peace process. Well, that's a very misleading term. On purpose? Peace. There's no war going on in Palestine. What's this question about a peace process? Because for the great unwashed, the American majority, they say, yes, peace is a good thing. But there is peace there. Those of you who have been there, you walk through the streets of Jerusalem, and here comes a Muslim family down the street, and they cross through a family of Orthodox Jews going the other way. There's peace there all the time. So when you talk about the peace process, you leave people with the concept that there's a war going on that has to be ended. What there is an occupation that has to be ended. But that's a word that's never used. Then they will talk about ending the conflict. See, same thing. What conflict? A conflict is between nation states that have borders and armies to defend them. The Palestinians have neither. But the real bite, to my mind, comes when you talk about negotiations. Are you kidding me? The guards are going to negotiate with the prisoners? Come on. This is a negotiation. But you have this. In Ramallah, there is a group of people, it's the Palestinian Negotiating Committee, led by Saad Erekat, if you know this great big, they're working on that for years. And it's supported by a group called Al-Haq, which means the right, and this the right in terms of justice. And this is formed of young people from different countries who are trained in international law. And they come from America, Canada, Sweden, France, Germany, and they go there to Ramallah to support Saad Erekat and his negotiators. And I took two of them aside when I met with them once. And I said, answer the question for me. When you go to these sessions with the Israelis, what do you do? And this very bright young woman from Belgium said, we beg. That is not a negotiation, folks. And when we keep pushing for negotiations, it's almost as if, do the Israelis know where the Palestinians are? Yeah, and do they know how to get there? And do they want to talk to them? They do not. We keep pushing. You got to negotiate. You got to negotiate. There's no negotiation possible between the prostrate prisoners and the armed guards. That's a fallacy of enormous proportions, but we keep using that phrase as if it means something, and it doesn't. You have to consider the language that we use, which quite possibly could be used on purpose. If you recognize the fact that the pro-Israel lobby has an awful lot of power and has been working on this a lot longer and harder than most of us, you can see that maybe they did use that language on purpose to cloud the minds of Americans who have a hard time being distracted from what Charlie Sheen is doing right now. In fact, you should know that we're putting together the next big flotilla, which is supposed to go in June. It's going to be about 8 times as big. I'll come back to that in a moment. And we're trying to get somebody like Lindsay Lohan to go on it. So the Americans will pay attention to what it doesn't do any good to have a congressman or a congresswoman or a former diplomat. No. You've got to have some celebrities on there. Maybe if we could get a big enough vote to have a NASCAR track, that might be it. But Americans just don't care because they don't know. And they don't know because they don't care. They don't push the papers to put anything in about news, and the papers and the media get pushed from the other side. They don't print this stuff, or you lose advertisers and subscriptions. And so they don't. And we pay a terrible price, not anything close to what the Palestinians are paying. Consider the media. Yeah, okay, so it's after mealtime. Consider the media now. I don't want to talk about it before you eat. Hosni Mubarak, what an evil man, suppressing his people. The Palestinian people that I know would give almost anything to have the kinds of freedoms that they have in Egypt, or Syria, or even in Libya. Because in Palestine, in Gaza, it's being done to you by people who are not your people. And who look upon you as some form of vermin. What was it Menachem Begin said? Cockroaches. And Hosni Mubarak never destroyed your home and let somebody else move into it, or set up checkpoints, or settler roads that nobody could cross or use. The apartheid in that part of the world is worse than anything South Africa ever had, as validated by Nelson Mandela. He said, well, we never had anything like that in South Africa, bad as it was. It is shameful beyond belief. And I personally believe, very strongly, that Israel has the right to do whatever it damn well pleases. It's a sovereign nation. What I don't like is what it costs us, what it costs my nation in terms of understanding, respect, prestige, dignity, honor. We have lost all of those things because of what's going on there. How many people left in the world, besides Mr. Cheney, think that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction? How in the world did they foist that off on the United States? It was because people like me, who at least knew this much about Iraq, were not allowed to say anything. What you had instead was competent anchor people on television who get the job for two reasons. One, they have nice cheekbones, and second, they can read the teleprompter as if they really understood what they're saying. Okay, I have to do this, I'm sorry. Every once in a while you have the feeling that perhaps you've made a small contribution. Several years ago I was on a television program. I was in the Washington studios of a major network, and up in New York we had two anchors, a left-wing wacko and a right-wing nutcase. And the right-winger was a woman, very strongly held opinions, and she lost her patience with me, and even though we were a couple of 100 miles apart, she did this. She said, let's get, contorted face, it was awful. She said, let's get one thing straight here, Ambassador Peck. I said, Peck. And she said, whatever. So we're getting along very nicely. Then comes the moment. She said, Iraq is going to have a constitution based on ours. They are going to have an American constitution. And I said, you're right, and that's why our government has told them forcefully, repetitively, they're only going to be allowed to have slavery for the first 70 years.